Hi, good morning. God, there are a lot of people here for 9 o'clock. It just sucks to be up at 9, especially when you're in Vegas. It's kind of wrong. So thank you for coming. So we're here today to talk about the new arcade and what that means and how parallels from history and cycles in history can help us to make better games and have a better game business today. Some disclaimers up front. I really hate slide presentations. Those of you who know me know this. I worked at Microsoft, so I hate PowerPoint. I also hate Keynote. I really hate zoomy text. There will be no zoomy text in this. Worst of all, I hate being able to read ahead while a boring presenter reads his boring slides and the audience falls asleep and fantasizes about suicide. And so you're not going to see any of this here. We're going to be boring, but the boring is not going to be captured on the slides. This was actually going to be a business talk when they first called me up and asked me to talk at DICE. And sadly, I've done 2 business talks at DICE before. I did one called You're Doing It Wrong in 2003, which was about problems with innovation in the game business. And this was right on the heels of launching this game console at Microsoft and all the problems with getting people to make new kinds of games, even for a new platform. And universally reviewed as sort of a pretentious ass in that talk, so that was a win. I then came back and gave a talk on game finance. That's an exciting topic. I did a lot of game finance. In order to do a lot of game finance, you have to look at a lot of stuff like this. This is FIN 46R, your federal tax and reporting regulations around variable interest entities. I will not be talking about this today. May I suggest succeeding in business with Microsoft Excel 2010 for those of you who want to learn and model these exciting features. Instead, today, we're going to talk a little bit about the new arcade. So I'm going to assume that everybody here pays attention to some news feed or the other and knows about the explosive, insane growth in Facebook games, mobile games, these operating systems, the way our business is changing and all of that. I'm not going to spend time extolling the virtues of Zynga and all of these other guys. Really smart people doing really interesting new things. Instead, I'm going to give what I'm going to refer to as a half-assed history lesson on the birth of the arcade era, and maybe show you a couple of things that parallel what's going on today that can help to inform how we handle tomorrow. So here we go. The video game business started out with nothing. There was an electromechanical game business that had done fairly well. There were some early attempts at universities at making images that changed on televisions and what it meant to interact with those things. Those ideas were copied by a couple of guys who later became really famous, guys like Nolan Bushnell, Al Alcorn, into this game, the first video game, the first Booth Babe. Coincidentally. This game was a titanic failure, even though it was a really cool game. You fly a spaceship around and you shoot at some flying saucers. And generally in the early 70s, people looked at this and they said, what the hell is going on the TV? You know, how come I can't, see All in the Family? So that didn't work. So then they copied another game called Tennis for Two, which was really simple, ball going back and forth with some paddles. This worked out a little bit better. In fact, the famous story that I will bore you with if you don't already know it is that the first time they put Pong out to test in a bar, the bar owner calls them back and they're like nervously, awaiting how their game did, as everybody who ships a game does. The bar owner calls them pissed off and says that it's not working. So they run over to the bar and they see it's not working because it's so filled with quarters. Okay? So they thought, oh, we're onto something. So from that moment, we started to see the growth of this incredible new industry. Starting out in delightful fern bars like this in the early 70s, games started to appear everywhere. Games became an incredible and prolific and important part of everyone's life across all sorts of different demographics. There were games everywhere. And in fact, the industry scaled in a totally remarkable way, especially for a business that needed to manufacture what essentially are refrigerators. There's basically a world takeover by video games. And I'll show you the scale of this game, or of this business. In 1978, around the time those people with their sideburns were hanging out in the Fern Bar playing different versions of Pong, the domestic sales of the video game business were around 50 million bucks. By 81, they were 900 million and $5 billion in quarter drops. By 82, we had $8 billion in domestic video game business just in terms of quarters dropped into machines. For context, that's $19 billion in our excellent funny money of today. And for scale comparison, that was bigger than the film business and the music business combined. At this time, Atari was the fastest growing company in history. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Does that story sound familiar to anybody? And there were more parallels. The demographics of people who played arcade games were incredibly wide. In fact, the demographics substantially constricted after the arcade crash when we got into consoles, and we began thinking of gamers as 14-year-old boys or whatever it is the media thinks gamers are. At this time, everyone was a gamer. There were horrifying development meetings with business executives who droned on and on about how to design your games. There were stupid marketing ideas with trailers driving around to malls getting people to try new games out. And they worked just as well then as they do now. There were achievements. No joke. There were horrible trade shows. All of this existed. There was even cosplay. All of this stuff is you know, more or less cyclical. So we really, as you look at what's going on in games today, are kind of entering into really what is another cycle of this explosion of games to a broad demographic of people, introducing them to new types of gameplay. There's danger in this if you read into the history. All of these trends follow sort of a similar path. There's a period of novelty. Oh my God, look, here's a video game. I should try this out. I.e., oh my gosh, look, I can play games on this Facebook thing, and I can play them with my friends. A lot of people play them, and then they develop this interesting thing called taste. And these people with taste expect that you give them a quality product now, just not any product. If you're not careful and you exploit them too much, they will then stop buying your product. And you end up with what happened in 1984 to that beautiful, giant, extraordinary, explosive arcade business. And you have a crash. And you end up putting stuff either digitally or physically into giant landfills. This is driven entirely by a very simple problem, which is making quality products. This memo, if you will read it, is one of the greatest things ever written by our own Rich Adam, who was frustrated that Atari was licensing games both in terms of licenses for their media, but also licensing games for their manufacturers that were bad, because executives had decided they wanted to cash in and make a whole lot of profit. And Rich here in this memo from 1982, that may as well be an email to all from anybody at any publisher or game company today, is saying that people seem to have, I think, severe cranial dysfunction if they believe that the business is going to go forward without making quality products. I think it's an important thing to pay attention to. In order not to be doomed, we have to try to make innovative, cool new games that take advantage of the fact that we have this awesome new audience, and treat them with some respect, and give them some products that are going to delight them and make them really happy, and hopefully continue to grow our business instead of exploiting it and crashing it down. And our solution to doing that is a little company called Innovative Leisure. And so what I'd like to do is let you meet some of these guys who have been in the business for so long, and who are some of the founders of the essential gameplay that I think we all take for granted today, and embarrass them a little bit and let you ask some questions eventually, actually. So if we get the lights back up. First, this blurry man is Owen Rubin. Owen really wanted to be in a promotional shot at Atari, and in fact, he complained about it so bitterly they finally did it, but they told him they'd only do it if it could be blurry. So this is Owen in focus.
It's true.
So Owen, what's the game that you're most known for?
It's Major Havoc.
Major Havoc, excellent. And what was the first game you ever programmed?
Believe it or not, it was tic-tac-toe on a first-generation tube computer.
With actual tubes?
Actual tubes.
And actual
Bendix
bugs?
G15. The first personal computer.
With tubes?
Tubes.
That doubled as a heater. Excellent. Next up, we have Ed Rotberg. I want you to notice several things about this photograph. I mean, there's the Jufro. There's the beer. But there's also the proto fanny pack.
Yeah.
As to what's in the fanny pack, I have a guess. Ed?
A camera?
What game are you best known for?
Battlezone, probably.
Battlezone, yes. And what was the first game you ever programmed?
It was tic-tac-toe also, but it was on an IBM 1401.
What the hell is an IBM 1401?
It was
Did it have beads?
Yeah, it was an early room-sized computer, core memory, the whole works.
We'll get back to that.
People don't know what core memory is anymore.
Ed Logg, we're being kind to on the photo because he's going to be severely embarrassed later on this afternoon. So Logg, what are you best known for?
Probably Asteroids, Centipede, and some other game that seems to escape me at the moment.
Oh, you mean the shirt you're wearing?
Oh,
Mr.?
yeah. That one.
Self-promotion, yeah.
Yes.
And what's your first game?
This is actually a remake. My old one wore out.
What was your first game that you worked on?
Oh, man, I don't remember the game, but it's back on a Mon Robot 2 or a Bendix G15.
You're a man who, for instance, ported Adventure between various ancient systems.
Yes, I ported Trek and Adventure between the two IBM and Control Data for camps way back in the mid-'70s.
Wow. And you can still walk into your own power. It's awesome. Okay. This is Rich Adam. Rich, how you doing, man? This is what development was like in what would you say that is, 82?
Yeah.
I see you have an oscilloscope there. That's pretty hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. What game do you think you're probably most known for?
Missile Command.
Oh, Missile Command, yeah.
I would say, is on that project. So.
It's actually interesting that at Innovative Leisure we have these guys, and then we have a whole bunch of young guys from USC, master's degree students, and it's fun for them, I think, to get gameplay feedback and stuff on the games we're making, and know that at some point, guys like Ed can pull out, yes, well, I made Asteroids, so just do it. All right, so I have some embarrassing questions for these guys that I'm going to start asking. Let them talk, since I'm sick of hearing me talk for a couple of minutes. And then, depending on how that goes and how disastrous that is, we may actually let you guys ask questions of them. And I would encourage you, and I will remind you, to ask questions that put them on the spot and embarrass them as much as possible. So the first thing that I will throw out, and I will make Ed start, is what parallels do you see between the arcade era that I just espoused with Similar Today and today? Like, is that actually true?
Well, to a certain degree in social game, or casual gaming in particular, because in the old arcade days, we used to say, you design a game so the guy can play with one beer in the hand and play with the other hand, or anybody can just walk up to a game, take one look, and say, I know what that is. I can play it. And that's still true today.
For 90 seconds.
Right.
Yep.
For 90 seconds, yeah. And like, how many people playing Facebook games today have a beer in one hand?
I don't know.
That's a good question, actually.
You can't go to the arcade anymore and find out.
Well, do you think there's a strong parallel, guys, between what happened during the arcade era and the types of games that people are playing today, or at least the type of players that there are today?
It's similar in I call them interstitial short games, things you do while you're waiting for the train or on the bus or going to work, on the train, things you can do in short periods of time, not the big long games. That's what arcade games were like too. Well,
and also I think if you don't grab the attention of the player, give them fun early on, you're not gonna, they'll move on to something else because there's just so much else out there.
Right, and that's also similar in the sense of the arcade, was an incredibly competitive thing because you had your game, your friend's game, just a whole lineup of games competing for your quarter, and the same thing is kind of true in the App Store or the Android market or whatever. There's so much product out there and it's all infinitely, immediately accessible. So that competitive aspect is the same thing too. Barrier to entry for people getting in, that's hugely different now, but you just have a ton of things competing with you simultaneously.
And then the development times are much shorter, and the teams are much smaller, and that's like a direct throwback to what we were doing in the arcade days.
Well, how big was it? How big like was the Asteroids team, for instance?
Well, it was me as producer, me as programmer, me as
Artist.
designer. We had a part-time technician that assembled the prototype boards and got the cabinet running, and an engineer to design the board.
Yeah, it was
we had an
three.
industrial design department that did the cabinet, and the art department do the outside side panel art, and that was basically it. And
So
manufacturing, of course.
But three or five guys, like one full-time guy,
Yeah, one full-time guy and a couple partial.
and people wondering by singing Magic Bubbles because they thought that it was going to fail because it was a little bubble popping game.
Well, no, it was, when I was first doing it, I had the asteroids floating on the screen. People come by and whistle the tune to Lawrence Welk, Tiny Bubbles, just to insult me.
What tune did they whistle when it sold 70,000 copies at $2,000?
Yeah.
I'm in the money.
I didn't hear any tunes then from them.
So it's interesting because, you know, it's even maybe easier now for players to turn your game off and play another game on a mobile device than it was to have to actually physically like move to a different game or stop playing a game in the arcade era. What kind of testing was done then to see how people reacted to a game, and how did that fold into the design process?
Well, we had a unique system. We could actually put it in an arcade and see how well it did.
Field test.
And
We'd
we'd actually
leave it there for weeks and weeks on end.
We'd actually play other games so we could watch people play, so they wouldn't know we were standing there watching them sometimes.
So a guy'd be playing Major Havoc, and there'd be this freaky-looking dude next to him, like wondering why
Not very
he was
good
so
at Asteroids,
interested. And like, yeah, like, God, that guy really sucks, and he's staring at me. I'm going to leave the arcade now.
You know, field test was it. The big thing, at least in the early days, it was just field test. We weren't doing focus groups or anything, and it was how many quarters you were in. It was a bottom line, and I'll never forget. You know, one of my favorite games from back then was Warlords, especially the 4-player version of it, and it was taken out on field test. You know, the guys who were working on the game loaded it up onto a pickup truck and drove it off. Well, these guys forgot to strap it down to the pickup truck, fell off, smashed the smithereens. They brought it back, put it in the lab, and I stuck a piece of paper on it that said, failed field test.
I happened to be there on that Friday when Greg came back and it said, we had an accident.
Yes.
And I said, is everybody okay? Yeah. Well, he says, what happened? I says, well, we drove around the corner and the machine fell off. And I said,
Field test was done.
yes, don't worry about it. Bring the pieces back.
There was another game they worked on that was so large that they wanted to put on field test. They built it inside the building and couldn't get it out the door. That one failed too.
But field tests were great because it's pure. You know, you'd go out there and it would either collect or it wouldn't. It would compete in that market or it wouldn't. And if it did, then you got to get built. And so that part was really, it was a pure market, and that was really good. And focus groups were, you know, I never really liked the feedback, the qualitative feedback that we got in focus groups from players, because it's not customers in the wild. It's a very artificial environment. They're predisposed to like what you're showing them, and so what they tell you is generally not that helpful. It's really pretty good, in my experience, telling you if your game sucks.
Right.
Okay? It doesn't tell you if your game's great. But if they don't go over the top liking it, then you better start really thinking about what you're doing.
I actually have the same feeling on focus groups too.
Yeah.
You know, I know that marketing people like to do them, but there's only usually 2 things I get out of a focus group. First time they show you the game, and people go up and they look like over people's shoulders, see what it is. Okay, that's a good sign. If they're sitting there counting the holes in the ceiling, it's like, okay, it's gone. And the one other question they do ask them is, you know, compare this to your favorite game. How do you rate it? And the rest of the stuff, I can pretty much ignore.
The other thing about field tests that I thought was interesting is you would see people play your game in ways you never expected it to be played. You know, you had a vision of what this game was going to be like, and people would go play it, and you go, well, they're not supposed to do that, or they're not spinning this right, or they're not playing. It was actually kind of eye-opening in ways of tuning the games to see people play. And
I just think it's really interesting, you know. And I hope that this is becoming obvious to everyone. But if you have low IQ like me, I'll point it out that we have a situation in which you have a market suddenly for games made by small groups of people in very tight cycles that can have a ton of user feedback in the way the design happens, that live or die only based on how good they are and how well they perform, and that players will drop trivially if they don't like them, and if they really like them, they'll pay you a terrific amount of money. And this is terrifying to the establishment of the games industry that's bet on the sort of traditional console model. It's not that it's incompatible or the console model is going to go away, but we're back in this situation again. And part of the reason that we thought it was interesting to make this company was that there was this group of guys still around, still, you know, lunatics, obviously, and you haven't seen half of it, we'll get to it, who want to do this again and want to do this crazy thing, who want to get back into the customer feedback loop. But the one thing that, what?
You make a point, though, that there's one part of testing we didn't talk about is that we tested each other's games.
Yeah.
We would, I mean, you would go in, so I'd be working on a game and Ed would walk over and play it, and you know, when the guy who's done Asteroids comes and says, this sucks,
right,
you don't get insulted by it, you kind of listen.
Well, so that's a good question. So you guys had at Atari what I think still is the longest string of hits in the history of the game business. Like, how did you do that? What was the internal culture with that development environment? What worked?
It was competitive.
It was very competitive.
I started as kind of a junior programmer, and
You're still
there
a
were
junior
a lot
programmer,
of
by the way.
really, I know, but and there were a lot of really talented people, but they were all like intellectual jocks. They were engineering jocks, and they were very competitive about, you know, techniques that you used, and they all just wanted to show each other, you know, how good we were, and so that competitiveness translated to, you know, see what I did, and then, you know, sharing details, and then, you know, some other smart guy goes, yeah, hey, you know, I could probably, so that all, you know, fed into a feedback loop for all of the products, and we have a whole lineup of labs, and so, you know, early on when we were doing, you know, PDP-11, and you'd write down your code on a piece of paper and hand it in for operators to type in, you know, you had some downtime, and so you'd go play your colleagues' games. And you'd, you know, play and you'd go, you know, that's not fair, you know, or that sucks.
Or that's too hard.
Right, or that's too hard. And you might or might not listen to somebody telling you that.
I shared a lab with Rich, and he was working on Gravatar. And I'd go to play it. It was like, this is just too hard.
Should have listened.
Well, I actually have an interesting anecdote that goes along with Millipede, because, you know, Owen, for example, suggested I put DDT in. I said, okay, fine, that sounds like a good idea. So that's how DDT became part of Millipede. For example, the Attract-plex, the Attract showing all the different creatures and everything else was done by Mark Cerny. Because he wanted to do that, and I said, Mark, go ahead and do it for me.
It was like the volcano in Battlezone. I mean, I was sharing a lab with Owen at the time, and you know,
Owen bounced around. You could only handle Owen for so long.
You could literally only handle Owen for so long, and he was working on Tube Chase for like the 14th time at that point.
He's still working on Tube Chase.
It's almost done.
And you know, this was like, you know, our first 3D vector games, and there were problems with, you know, our math processor. There were problems with the vector generator. I mean, there were a lot of things going on, and the biggest problems was my crappy code. And so, you know, I'm struggling with this, and every day Owen would come in and he'd see, every day he'd see the volcano. He says, when are you going to make the volcano active? When are you going to make the volcano? And finally I said, look, you want the volcano active? Make it active yourself, and come in the next day, and there's, you know, there's the code on my chair. You know, so that's why there's an active volcano in Battlezone. I had nothing to do with it.
So essentially a controlled process of beating the crap out of each other.
But you listened. Like to Rich's comment, it was competitive, but that same competitiveness, you would go to Rich and say, this would be a cool thing in your game.
Right.
Because you wanted to, it was competitive. Hey, make it better.
I think there's even one more important point that I think we should stress even more, that is if people come in to most video game people and say, your game sucks, they'll take really offense at it.
Yeah. Right.
Whereas most of us is just say, why?
Right.
What can I
What do you like? What helps?
You really care about, what an Ed Logg or an Owen Rubin or Rich Adams says when they come in and, they critique your game. They're not there to critique it, they're there to play it. And you're getting honest feedback from people, who are, really talented at what they're doing. So, it was just a wonderful environment.
And play until you took my name off the high score table, right?
I
played Ed's.
Forgive me.
I played Ed's. I would go, you'd work there till 2, 3 in the morning sometimes. It was that kind of environment. And while I was waiting for things to compile and get ready, I would go play Asteroids in his early development, and I'd fill the high score table with my initials. And one day, my initials wouldn't stick. I'd put my initials in, they'd disappear. So he had coded out so my initials wouldn't stick. So I changed them. I changed the way I put them in. The next day, that didn't stick. And the next day, so I couldn't put them in at all.
I don't know anything about that.
So that
Never happened.
But I think it's interesting. We talk a lot about rapid prototyping and iterative design and the feedback process in design and all of that. And again, I don't mean to sound so damn boring, but this is accidentally almost, really. When you guys showed up at Atari, you came up with this process that just really worked, and then it built on success. It's easy to listen to a guy, who just made Centipede if he's giving you feedback on your game, because you can actually take him seriously. This is something that's really missing and it has become missing as we have these huge, team sizes and stuff in modern game development, and things get more complicated. And these tools that are supposed to help us, end up taking so much time that everybody feels really siloed, sort of on a modern GameCube, and it's really to the detriment of the game. And so, I think one of the exciting things about the explosion of mobile and social games is that it gives us an opportunity to go back to this fast iterative design and really innovate again and come up with new stuff and apply that process. And I think it's also very interesting to look back to game designers for a lot of feedback on game design during development, as a group, as a peer group of people working together, as opposed to attempting to mine it all out of data coming back to you, from the mobile platforms and from the social platforms, which shows you what people played, but doesn't show you what their face looked like, doesn't show you why they stopped playing, was their kid crying, or what was going on. It's an interesting thing. So what do you guys think, I have to ask, what do you think of modern games? What do you, what categories are working, what aren't? What do you, looking with this perspective, as you have played games now for 30 years and made them,
we have
where
to
do you
answer
think we
it
are?
with these people in the room.
Yeah, and then they're going to get to give you crap on the microphones in a couple of minutes. So, what do you think of modern games?
I still play casual games. I don't care for the long, taking 20, 40, 60, 80 hours to finish a game. I still like something I can play short order.
What do you play? What do you really like?
Oh, I still play Free Cell. I like Risk 2, for example, Space Word Ho, things like that.
Mr. Adam?
I play a little bit more, I would say, of the big platform games. But once again, the vast majority of my playtime is going to the more casual kinds of games. Some of the puzzle games, and Angry Birds, Cut the Rope, and Limbo. Love Limbo. Those are, that's more my, where I, really find myself smiling when I get done, as opposed to your Assassin's Creeds and your Uncharted's and your that genre of game where you're not smiling when you get done. You're pissed off and you put the thing away. I'll come back to it later.
That's great. So all those guys in the audience
off?
are going to kick my ass in the bar
Sorry.
later. So thanks. That's great.
No, but see, I'm just the opposite. I don't play those because I know I'll get addicted to them. Worlds of Warcraft, I did the 30-day trial, and I had to delete it because I knew the minute I bought it, I was my wife wouldn't know me anymore, and I'd be huddled on it.
You've been reviewing games on iOS for a long time,
Right.
mobile games.
I have 286 games on my iPhone at the moment. So
What do you like?
I'm like Ed. I Cut the Rope I thought was great, and Angry Birds was great. I like those kind of games I can play in short spurts.
So what's working about those games today, and what's not working from your perspective? Looking back at the history of it all.
Well, it seems to match the classic arcade criteria that you need for a game. It's got multiple strategies, everything you need. You take one look at it, you know what you need to do.
It's got to be different, though. It's
has
there's
a
100
hook.
variations of Breakout out there on iPhone, and I don't want to play that. I've played that before. So even though it'll build on old game styles, which is great, it has to have something new.
What else is important?
I would say, you know, the novelty of whatever platform that you might be using. I mean, you know, these new handheld iPad, iPhone, you've got a touchscreen, you've got accelerometers, you can do all sorts of stuff. And, you know, throughout the history of this business, you know, the player wants novelty. Even the latest version of Madden, the, you know, nth version of Madden, what's the first thing, you know, guys want and players want? It's like, what do they do new? You know, it's friggin' Madden, okay? But they want something new. So that's the component. So, and you know, when we were, you know, starting out, the couple things that we had, because there was nothing, we were filling a vacuum, but we had custom controls. We could say, hey, I have a game idea and I want to have this kind of controller, and we had a mechanical department and people who would like conceive of ways to create a controller that would do this custom thing.
Yeah, think of the Star Wars controller as a perfect example of that. I mean,
and then what the Tempest controller came out of just one axis of that.
Right.
So there's all that, you know. So, and for years and years and years, you know, it came when graphics in the home became superior to what you saw in the arcade. Really, that's the only thing the arcade had left was custom controller. So, you know, all of that novelty and innovation that can come in some of those new platforms. And, you know, Guitar Hero had custom control, you know.
Wii,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of Wii at the time it came out, it didn't leapfrog the previous graphic elements. It wasn't that major step that home games were taking, but that controller was so different that you saw a lot of Wii games.
So feel.
Yep,
Feel.
true.
So that Tempest knob still, you know, the weight that it has is incredibly important to the gameplay. You know, and it's funny to watch, you know, the people try to port those games to modern platforms, because absent that control, these games don't make sense. And guys will come by and play Asteroids or play Tempest, you know, at our office, and they've only have been exposed to an iPad, and they'll play Asteroids and they'll say, "Holy shit, this game is friggin' awesome!" And they'll play it for an hour. I had no idea. It's like, well, yeah, you know, that experience has to be entirely integrated, and we have this awesome new set of devices with all this new potential for input that I think we're only
to this day,
touching the surface of.
I still think that Berserk was tuned by the control. Oh, yeah. I mean, those of you who ever played the arcade version of Berserk, it was the control that tuned the game. I mean, that made it harder. Very cool game.
I think it's kind of sad that people have their only experience of old arcade games is on an iPad or on their computer with a keyboard, because they just were not designed to be played that way.
And it doesn't have the feel.
It doesn't have the feel.
Yeah.
I mean, the connectedness, the sense of connectedness to what's going on the screen is why people say that game has a great feel.
So as we you know, embark on on all of our games, like, how do you guys think about feel and control on these mobile platforms?
It's just as important as it was 35 years ago.
It's the new control.
You know, what we're selling is, you know, it's the ego gratification of you being in total control of a complex machine in a complex world out there, and you being completely connected and not here, you're in there, and in control. And so, you know, we don't, in our daily lives, we don't have that much control. You know, you got to get up and go to work, and got to, you know, drive through traffic. And so if I can get that and feel that sense of control and empowerment over some complex machine, in our day, it was this giant stand-up box with these controls and, you know, the newness of technology and all that stuff. The newness of technology is still there. It's just in your hand. But that's really what we're selling, is that ego gratification. And then also, of course, you know, it's fun. It's got to be fun.
I use the word skate.
Yeah, right.
Skate. Yeah.
So last question before we take some from the audience. So one of the things that I really enjoyed reading as feedback from our press announcement of Innovative Leisure was all the people giving you guys crap for being old. It was really amusing to me. And how, because you had started programming on, like, you know, tube computers, you know, your dinosaurs and your days were past. I enjoyed it because it was making fun of you, which is great, of course. But I also enjoyed it because of the weird naivete. Because the thing that I've noticed, and having been a physicist where we had all this legacy hardware that I had to learn how to use, is that the skills you develop, if you could program a Cyber 6000 or whatever that damn thing was called with the 12 bits, when you're suddenly handed the tools of today, it's like, this extraordinary, easy, training wheels kind of thing. That's fantastic. Yeah. So talk a little bit about how development systems have changed, because all these guys have been programming this whole time. So how are tools, and does that make making games easier or harder?
Well, if I may, I'll jump on that one. I'd like to let everybody realize that when we first started out, a lot of our games were 256 bytes of memory, and our programs were 2K. That includes everything, art, basically everything. And so for us, it was, I guess, working up in the older hardware, it wasn't a big stretch for us. It was no problem. Nowadays, people are, running in, hundreds of megabytes, and it's like, what are you guys doing? You can do that in 2K.
We cared about bits. I mean, it's really strange. We'd have so little memory that we would take an 8-bit thing and we'd have each bit mean something, because we didn't have enough memory. And today, you don't even think about stuff like that.
We had basically an 8-bit processor. So if you wanted to had a 16-bit number, you had to do all the math yourself.
Yeah, double percent.
And there was division. There's no division. Remainder. There's no remainder.
Well, there were a lot of restrictions on memory and number of cycles you had to get things done, because these were not fast processors either.
750
and but the question remains is, we're not working with those kind of platforms now, and the development environments have grown up along with. I mean, when we had a hard bug, we'd have to hook a hardware analyzer up to it, and then have to interpret what that meant, and now. We've got much nicer development environments, and you can rapidly get things on the screen early, and it's both a blessing and a curse. I mean, on the one hand, it really lets you do things that we could never have even dreamed of doing in the old days. On the other hand, it lets you get away with things that you shouldn't be getting away with, and it doesn't discourage bad coding practices
or design
practices. And we've seen some of this. We're working with the young guys from USC who are really bright, great group of guys, and yet I'll run into a mistake that none of us would even think about making, just because we grew up with all of that, and we view a problem at its core level a little bit differently. We look at bits, we look at bytes, we look at wasting cycles, and I don't think there is as much of that with the young programmers coming out now. They'll get an engine up. Some bright guy's going to get a nice engine up, and another designer is going to program something in a scripting language, and there's a complete disconnect for how the game engine was designed from how the way the designer is using it, and there's so much power and memory, you can get away with it now. And I think on these smaller devices, you're getting a little bit more restricted.
And you're getting closer to the machine. Yeah, I agree with that. But there all those layers of abstraction between you and the metal, because we were close to the metal, and that's how we had to do it. And now with all those extra layers, there is, you sort of lose that. We had to think like the machine.
I think Battlezone is a good example. Today you can grab Unity and it does all the 3D for you. You don't have to think about 3D. In those days, they actually, when Ed was doing, to do Battlezone, Mike Alba was working on a specialized piece of hardware to attach to the game board that did 3D. I mean, he programmed it from scratch.
The math box.
Called the math box that would help him do 3D.
Yeah, he did. We had to give him the algorithms for the 3D. I mean, he was just programming the bit slice processor.
There was no 3D, didn't exist. I mean, they had to make it up.
But this actually goes back to what Ed was saying. All these limited resources and all that stuff was really almost it created the necessity for the collaboration, because we would go, it wasn't just, us being competitive. There was also that whole work together, because it's like, what, do you have a trick for this? We'd go to, Mike Alba was called Dr. Bizarro, because he would come up with really creative and unique solutions that would fit in the box of limited resource that we had. And so, and we would go around if we ever had a really gnarly problem, and we go to Mike or we'd go to everybody and say, you know, what do we do? How do I do this? What's the best way? So that actual necessity really was helpful for us to create the environment of collaboration.
So the biggest change may well be that the constraint on design that forced you to be focused was enforced by the limited hardware back in the day, and now it's something that we have to actually enforce on ourselves.
But that same constraint is backwards now, because if we needed something, we go to Mike or we go to this guy Dave Shepard who did all our tools and say, it'd be great if the tools would do this, and next week the tools did that. Today, you have a limitation that the tools are what the tools are. I can't call Unity and say, it'd be great if you could add this little piece for me, because I'm not going to get that tomorrow.
Oh, Unity still rocks, though.
It does rock, but it's a different.
It's a totally different
thing.
But
it sets its constraints as opposed to asking for changes.
Okay. Well, so we have a couple of minutes for people to ask questions from the audience. If somebody has a question that they dare to ask these gentlemen, there are a couple of microphones out there. Anybody have a question? Anybody feel like getting up and actually asking a question?
Hey, I'm Randy Pitchford. My studio is Gearbox Software.
Hey, Randy.
Hi. Are you guys, the games you made, I mean, I would not be standing here if I did not play the games that you've made. Are you cognizant of the impact that you've had on people like me? Like
don't do this to them. Don't, please. On Monday, we have to be a company again.
What's that?
No, go ahead.
I will take a shot at that because just about everybody who's in your position says more or less along the lines of, you know, when I was a kid, I spent all my milk money on your game. And so, you know, I'm trying to think of, well, are they saying I should be feeling guilty? But or should I turn around and say, thank you, I appreciate it, because without you, I can't be up here.
I'm humbled just to be in the same, you know, I'm just going to...
No. You know,
Thank you.
we're regular schmoes like anybody else. My accountant, when the article came out, you know, it's not something I talk about with my friends. You know, when the article came out, he wanted to send me a bill for all the quarters that he put in the games we were playing. That's like,
No, but honestly, you know, Randy, I know for a fact, given the awesome stuff that Gearbox has done, that you get the same kind of response from a lot of fans, and the way these guys respond is the same way I've seen you respond, which is like, you know, yeah, I love doing this, and it's an honor to get to do it, and I don't quite know how to process that you know, think this thing about me, you know?
It wasn't the goal to.
I mean, you
to
like your
become
players, and we like our players. So it's the same relationship, really. So.
So 20 years.
Me
you
too.
This
gray
hair. You can sit up here.
You could be.
Remember the day.
You could be as cool as Owen one day if you play your cards right.
I aspire to that.
I'm sorry.
Hey, other questions? Really, Randy is. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there's one back there, too.
There's a mic.
James Costa, I'm CEO of 3G Studios, fledgling studio for 11 years now, right? Still a startup. So I just have a question for you because, I mean, in your guys' days, and you mentioned a few times, if a game was good, if it tested well, it got made. And we hear that terminology. We work a little bit in the legitimate gaming industry. You still see cabinets out on the floor of the casino. And so that mentality still reigns. But in the video game industry, the friction is no longer in the actual production of a game, the physical production of a game. The friction is now in the design and development of the game. We see game teams getting huge, distribution channels getting very, very cheap. So how do you reconcile that with the fact that the game really needs to be made before it can be tested in today's environment?
well, there's a couple of things I want to, I'm going to jump in this real quick and get out of the way hopefully real quick. On the one hand, if we look at the platform games, the large production model games, I mean, that's a different paradigm. They have a huge investment that they have to make before they learn whether they've got something. And so there is far less predisposition to kill it and not produce it, obviously. I mean, this is nothing new. And in the old days, when we were doing arcade games, and basically because of what they paid us, and in the, the current mode because of how quickly you can get something up and playing to figure out if there's anything there, it's much easier to just go ahead and kill something and not waste time on it. And so what you're saying is absolutely correct. It's good to kill something that's not working and get those resources working. Give them another chance as quickly as possible. So.
Well, there's an interesting conundrum that that the game industry has had a hard time getting its hand around as it scaled the kinds of, I don't want to say production management, but the kinds of coordinative skills that other industries have. Like you look at the aircraft industry, if you look at the rapid prototyping that Kelly Johnson and the guys at the Skunk Works at Lockheed figured out, they would do this rapid prototyping thing where they would come up with, we're going to make the SR-71 from scratch for the Air Force in 9 months, and it's flying over Russia. And they applied this skill to it that somehow magically enabled the kind of feedback process that we're talking about here into, bigger project management. And it's a really, really hard thing to do. Now, that said, I mean, not only from a technical standpoint, but from a business standpoint, in the arcade era, there was a huge advantage, which was that if you were going to go to production, it meant that warehouses full of dudes were going to get like wood and glue out and make shit.
Right.
Like in great proliferation, When I say 70,000 cabinets, you just like it's inconceivable that they made that and shipped these like refrigerators around the country. And that discipline required by making the decision to take a game and put it into production, I think was really helpful because that necessarily put a pressure on the entire business. And that was a very natural, automatic pressure to be on that business. During the console era, like we've really wandered around in the woods trying to figure out where that pressure is, trying to figure out how to apply that.
It happened before. The 1984 crash you're talking about, the 2600, that friction went down to do a cartridge, and it really killed the VCS because so many cartridges came out at the $29 to $49 level that were total crap because they just were getting them in the field.
Because they wouldn't kill them.
I think today, though, at 99 cents, you don't feel so bad if you spend 99 cents and the game isn't very good. You just delete it and move on. I think the pricing makes a difference now as well.
I think there's the great natural pressure of these things is just that the audience is going to move on. So, before you put it out with your name on it,
you want it to stick.
I think we're missing one point too, and that is we don't have a field test anymore. And so we're going to be counting on ourselves to analyze each other's games. And so we're basically going to be testing our own games and saying, that one's okay, this one's good, that one we should probably kill. So that's something that we are bringing to our own company that we didn't have, we used to have in coin-up, we don't currently have in the consumer business.
We had Gene Lipkin. Right. and the Lipkin switch.
We had a VP that used to
tell him
walk.
the story,
He would walk into your lab.
Tell it on.
He would walk into your lab and he would look at your game and say, "Stop doing this. It's done." And just kill it. And I used to call it the ugly baby syndrome. It's still your baby. Okay, you love your baby. You don't want to kill it. So we used to have the hardware engineers put a switch up underneath the lab bench that if you heard Gene was coming to your lab, you'd flip this switch. You couldn't miss him. He was coming because he was talking all the way. You'd flip the switch and the game just wouldn't work that day. Well, something's wrong. We're working on it. And he would go away.
We'll show it to you later.
Because you didn't want him to see it because he might shoot it.
Because he wasn't quite ready.
He wasn't ready.
And you would try like crazy. But, in hindsight, I always say, we don't really know, but in hindsight, he often, he would kill something of yours, and later you'd go, yeah, okay, I got to move to something else. He probably was right. We don't, you don't never really know. But
Gene had good game sense.
He had good game sense, though. So sometimes you have to kill things. Sometimes you really do. You just have to say to yourself, I tried, it doesn't work. Effort on something else.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the instrumentation that you can put in games is so awesome now. But instrumenting a game that's just fundamentally not working out there, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
The instrumentation helps you tweak stuff. It's not going to help you decide on fundamental concepts and what we should go with or not. Are there other questions? Because we could just go on and on forever on whatever we wanted. Hey.
Way in the back.
Ryan Schneider, Insomniac Games. I want to know more about your working with the USC students. What have you learned and what has surprised you so far?
You want to go first?
I'm working with this wonderful master's candidate. He has been a joy to work with.
Wait, before you, let me say, so we just for context, so for those of you who don't know, we got these guys up and started, and in order to go into production, rather than hiring, a bunch of guys out of the game industry, we thought it'd be a really interesting experiment to take a bunch of really bright young designers and programmers and put them together with these guys and see what came out of it. And so we went to USC to Mike Zaida's engineering program at the Vitebri School of Engineering at USC, and we got a bunch of master's candidates who are doing internships with these guys making games, and it's been a super fun experience so far. So that's the context, and I apologize.
Yeah, just like I say, he's a tireless worker. He's got really good instincts about the games. He gets what makes a game fun and what doesn't. The best part for me is that he's having a blast working on this project.
They all are.
And when he hears this, he'll be unmanageable on Monday again. Great.
But one of the interests, I kind of touched on it earlier, is how just our different histories of how we evolved really, affects actual hard coding examples. And I'll just really briefly give you one. He'd been struggling. We had this one bug in the game we're working on, and it was in his part of the code, and he'd been working on it for a while, and finally, I had some time, so I started looking at it, and he was checking this value, a coordinate value, to see whether it was in an even column or an odd column. It would make some determination on something that could happen, and he was using the coordinate, and he was modulo 2ing it and comparing it being equal to 1, and it's something none of us would ever.
See, it's a nerd joke.
It's a nerd. It's not a joke. I mean, it's just we would have never even. The thought would have never crossed any of our minds to do it that way. You end it with 1, and if it's true or false, I mean, it's that simple.
Think like the processor.
Well, the pitfall in that is if you modulo 2 the negative number that happens to be odd, it will not compare equal to 1, and it's even, and your algorithm breaks down. And he couldn't see that, unless he had stepped through the code. And I just looked at it and I saw it, and he thought that was amazing. And okay.
So I can think of other examples. So one of the guys working with us, I wanted to figure out how to move a guy from here to here, and in the days I would do it, I would just take the deltas and know what the vector looked like. And he came back the second day, and he's got this huge, big A-star algorithm for moving the guy around the screen, which just churned a lot of processing power. And I was like, we have to do other things in the game, right? It was like eating up most of the power of the iPhone at that point. So, it's trying to teach them to think simple, because they're used to just using complex math, and they don't really think about they haven't really got on the physical devices yet. And that was sort of getting them the reality that that's got to run on an old iPod, right? So it's been kind of fun, because they're also absorbing it like a sponge. Yeah. So you see this kind of turn in their productivity as they get this, and they just have dove in and put their heart into it. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. The flip side is that they're having to teach the old farts how to use simple tools like Unity. So that's
and they are. Yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot from them.
Yeah, no, they're better at that than me.
Yeah. Really, Owen? No. Just click on save. Thanks. Okay. Other questions?
Over here.
Okay.
Yeah, I grew up in the arcades also playing those games, and I'm curious what you guys think of today's quote-unquote social games, because growing up in the arcades, that's where the friends went to play and hang out, and now it's all online, so I just wanted to get you guys' opinion on that.
But for me, there's a difference between standing next to someone and playing them who's hitting you and bumping you there's some of the same kind of things going on, but to me, I miss the personal face-to-face kind of contact you get. I feel like people are too distant in these social games now. They're playing across the country, which is on one side very cool, and the other side, you have no idea who that person is. I kind of miss that arcade.
It's a different dynamic.
People had people again, in being a freak like me and looking at arcade history, people tend to not remember that the arcade was like fundamentally a social place, and you were playing with all of your friends, and that dynamic was important in the way you designed games. There was multiplayer because of that. When Tim designed Ripoff, it was because he saw people wanting to play together, so he invented co-op one day.
The Space Duel today.
Important day.
People playing together.
So you guys are heavy-duty Facebook users. In fact, all of the embarrassing pictures that I have of you came from your Facebook.
Sadly.
Not heavy duty.
So seriously, what Facebook games? Go at it. What do you really think?
I don't play Facebook games, I'll be honest. My gaming is outside of Facebook.
Why?
Because I go on Facebook quite irregularly and not very often, I got very turned off by getting messages from all of my friends about and wanting me to, join and help them do their thing. I didn't have that bandwidth for it,
I haven't bought a thing for my farm.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, whether it's the farm or the mafia or whoever.
Well, that's just because you're a hermit. That's not because of the games
Could be.
being
It could be.
problematic.
It could be that I have a life outside of games as well too.
Like you can't belittle it. I mean, I know there's got to be someone from Zynga out there. Their games are huge. I mean, people
Yeah.
people
Oh,
really
yeah.
like them. I'm not going to belittle
Successful.
those games. They're very successful. It's not the kind of games I played or grew up playing. So I never got into Farmville. Although I hate to admit it, I did get into the Smurfs one on the iPhone for a while, which was the same game. Someone knocked it off, and I immediately got the appeal of the social gaming kind of idea.
You as a Smurfs fanboy is really...
It was scared me too, by the way.
yeah, it interests me that you like that.
Actually, Tiny Tower was the better one.
I didn't get that much into the Facebook social games, but my wife, who was an old time worked at Atari for 16 years in marketing and so forth, and she was very much a game centric person. She played Farmville and she liked the the collaborative and the friend part of it, and that you could share. And I get it. You get to all dress up your world and control it again and just make it pretty like you want it to be. But when I was watching her play one day, and she had all of her friends who had plots around her, and one of our old colleagues, Dennis Harper, was over there. He had, she's, oh, there's Dennis's thing, and I was like, can we go attack Dennis?
That's the first thing you want to do. Yeah,
no, I did.
That's the first thing I went
Well,
to
if
do.
you take him down, I don't want to help him.
Can I dig up his farm? Yeah.
Can I send weevils?
Can I poison his plants?
Send a dinosaur over there.
So anyway, we're incurable in that way, I guess.
Yeah, I have a different excuse. I'm currently working on 3 games right now. For a casual environment, I've just released beta on one and I'm middle of the other and starting up a third, so I don't have a lot of
It's a
free
ton of
time. I really want to do other things.
But leaving it on that note, I thank you guys for listening to us all, and look forward to getting all of your feedback on the games that we make, and I hope that we can give you the opportunity to go and burn down your friend's farm sometime very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.